What are our digital rights as users in this information technology world?
And the way that we define digital rights is to look at your civil liberties and your consumer rights as affected by digital technology. And this doesn't just mean online, this also means things like privacy being a civil liberty, when applied to your medical records being kept on a large database. Are they private, are they secure? It's also about access to knowledge, so this covers things like copyright reform, patents and that kind of issue, and identity. So we try and define digital rights as broadly as possible and try and take in things like e-voting, e-democracy, and the quite broad issues so that we don't end up wanting to work on a particular issue and need to define that, it's not really digital rights. So if you're trying to replicate the way that your medical data is being dealt with in the real world on a computer and you have no ability to mark something as private, must not be shown to other healthcare providers, must not be shown to patients, then you destroy an important part of the patient privacy aspect of your medical records.
The question I think everybody wants to see answered is in fact that data secure?
The security of data is a significant issue, particularly when you're looking at large databases of information. So when governments and private companies are collecting huge amounts of information about you as a person, you do want to know that that data is secure, but this is one of the big weak spots. We've had reports that some government databases are being either unauthorized access or being attacked by malicious hackers, on a yearly basis. And of course, the more data you gather, the more databases you have, the bigger the databases are, the more at risk they are, the harder they are to secure. They become highly valuable propositions. If you've got lots of data about people's movements, that can become very valuable, and the people who want access to that are not necessarily just criminals. You also have various industry interests who are thinking, how can we get at this? Is there a way we could do an unauthorized search, or can we lobby the government to give us access to this data because we think it would be useful for us? And the individual whose privacy should be respected is frequently the last person to know that their data has been sold. We're working on a campaign at the moment that we haven't quite launched yet, but hopefully within the next couple of weeks, which is about campaigning against the extension of copyright term on sound recordings in the UK. Currently copyright is at 50 years and the music industry is lobbying to have that extended to life plus 70, which will mean that the majority of work currently in the public domain will be out of copyright, go back into copyright if the term extension is applied retrospectively. It's very important, we think, that the music that's in the public domain remain in the public domain and that the copyright term remains at 50 years. Because after 50 years, there's a tiny, tiny minority of recordings that remain commercially viable. If we extend copyright, then the other 90, 95, 99% of recordings that aren't commercially viable will just vanish. Because no one will be exploiting them commercially, but then we won't have them in the public domain either.
It will still be renewable, or not really?
The way that copyright works is that you have a set term in the UK, so it's not renewable. The only way with sound recordings would be if you were to take a sample, clear the copyright on that sample, or if it's public domain, then you need to be careful of the copyright in the composition and then reuse that in another composition, whether it's a remix or a mashup or whatever, and then you get a copyright in that new piece of culture, that new piece of music. The idea of a renewable copyright is a very old one. In fact, copyright started with the Statute of Anne as being 14 years plus 14 years. So you had to renew it after the first period was over. Whereas now copyright has gone to a model where you have set terms, and those terms are incredibly long. These things like life plus 70 is a very, very long time.
Even for the Rolling Stones.
Absolutely. I mean, Keith could potentially go on forever. So, that would have a significant impact on when Rolling Stones material will come into the public domain. I mean, at the moment, 50 years ago, that was 1956, so we need to be looking at things like, the Beatles and Elvis and Cliff Richard coming out into the public domain.
We see this a lot, and the Computer Misuse Act is a classic example. It's not bad legislation in its heart. It should. We need a Computer Misuse Act. We need to be able to identify and punish people who are spamming, who are carrying out DDoS attacks, who are hacking into databases and doing bad things. The difference is you need to be very specific in your legislation, otherwise you end up with a lot of friendly fire.